Hey guys. Tonight we slowly step into a cold dawn where justice is not the final goal but merely an excuse for a performance so brutal you'll begin to wonder, do humans truly have hearts? Or just frozen stones in their chests? Close your eyes for a second and imagine this scene. On a vast field outside the city of Munich, over 10,000 people stand shoulder to shoulder, holding their breath. The sun has yet to rise, and the night mist still clings to the faces, eagerly awaiting the sight of blood. On the high wooden platform, Anna Papenheimimer kneels. Her hair is tangled, matted with sweat and blood. Her body has already been twisted by torture devices that would chill your spine just hearing about them. The executioner does not hold an axe. He walks forward with a pair of red-hot iron tongs. No one speaks, because everyone understands. What is about to happen is not a swift death but a public humiliation choreographed down to each breath. When the tongs close on her chest, the sound that echoes in the silence isn't a scream, it's a choked sob. As if her soul just realized, mercy has gone extinct from this world. And if you think you'd be braver than her, honestly, you wouldn't survive either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're settling in with your blanket and pillow, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is, so I can see how many time zones the shadows of the past are about to pass through. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of the Papenheimimer family begins with death, a quiet death, lingering like a trail of black smoke that clings to their fate. In a small town in Bavaria, where Anna grew up, her father held a job that everyone needed but no one wanted to see. He was a gravedigger, a caretaker of the dead, his bare hands touching what people feared and avoided. In a society where superstition outweighed faith, his profession was a kind of hereditary curse. Not just him, but the whole family was branded as unclean, as if the shame had seeped into their flesh, their every breath. Picture little Anna, at 6 or 7, timidly crossing the town square. Other children scattered, avoiding her like a diseased animal. Mothers pulled their children close, clutching rosaries, muttering prayers. The baker never dared hand a loaf of bread directly to Anna. He would drop it on the wooden counter and immediately step back as if even the warmth of her fingers was a threat. That is what it feels like to be born in darkness, to be marked from the moment you take your first breath that you don't belong, that you are merely a shadow haunting the edge of the community. But strangely, isolation has its own gravity. The outcast often find one another, like two lost fragments colliding in the night. And that's how Anna met Paulus. He too was an outsider, a silent soul marked as filthy simply because of his father's job. His family cleaned sewers, collected waste essential work that kept the city from drowning in stench and disease, yet earned them only contempt. Their marriage wasn't only born of love, though many records suggest they shared a rare tenderness amid the cold. It was also a decision to survive, two rejected souls holding hands, building a fragile fortress against a world that had cast them out. The day they stood before the priest to vow their union, that promise was more than a bond. It was a quiet declaration. We will not surrender. If the whole world hates us, at least we still have each other. Night. In the early days of their marriage, they held onto a fragile hope that if they worked hard and kept their heads down, they'd be left alone. But 17th century Bavaria never let different live in peace for long. Children came, one after another. Simon, the eldest, with dark eyes that stared as if trying to understand why the world loathed his family. Then Gumpretha, a quiet boy who clung behind his mother's back. And finally, Michelle, the youngest, born in a brutal winter when hunger clung to every roof. Perhaps Anna once believed that children would give them something to hope for. But with each new birth, the invisible curse of disgust spread further. The eyes that followed them on the street shifted from curiosity to scorn, then finally to fear. Each morning, Paulus trudged through the dark streets, hauling buckets, collecting waste left behind by the wealthy. Each night, Anna lit the small hearth, warmed her hands, and carefully split the last piece of bread. In the damp-smelling room, the children huddled together, waiting to hear their father's return, a confirmation that, at least for today, they were still alive. But rumors, like poisonous mushrooms after the rain, kept sprouting. A cow died. Someone claimed to have seen Paulus walk by the field. A child fell ill. Someone remembered Anna once asked for milk from their home. No proof was needed. Just a few whispers were enough to turn poverty into crime. And then came war. Not always in gunfire. Sometimes it arrived as a fever sweeping through villages. Sometimes as waves of beggars passing by, feeding everyone's fear of loss. In that fear, people needed someone to blame. The Papenheimimer family, with their unclean past and grave-dusted hands, became the perfect target. But Anna and Paulus still held on to each other, held on to their children. For them, each evening they closed that tattered door was a small victory. In that fragile moment, they were not unclean. They were simply a family poor, exhausted, but still whole. There was one thing Anna and Paulus never expected. Their quiet existence itself had become an uncomfortable reminder to the entire community. Every time people saw them, they remembered death, remembered filth, remembered the things everyone relied on but no one wanted to acknowledge. And when a community has grown weary from war, hunger, and fear, it doesn't take much to turn contempt into hatred. The winters passed, one after another. That year, food was so scarce, even the wealthy had to cut their rations. Anna grew gaunt, her arms skin and bone, but every night she still sat brushing the children's hair, trying to appear calm. Paulus was exhausted from cleaning sewers each night. He left in the dark and returned just as dawn broke. The few coins he earned weren't enough to buy a decent meal. Simon had grown older, beginning to understand their place. He often asked, "Why do they hate us? We didn't do anything." Anna didn't answer, because the truth was there was no reason, except that they existed in the wrong place, born to the wrong family. Then one night, as Paulus trudged along a cobbled street, a drunken man stumbled into a ditch. He died choking on filthy water. By morning, the rumors had already begun. Papenheimimer did it. He cursed the man. "He's a servant of the devil." No one asked for proof. No one wanted the truth. The story fit too neatly, too conveniently to release the anxiety built up from months of famine, fear, and grief. The next day, Anna took Michelle to the market. The looks that once only avoided her now turned openly hostile. A woman in a black shawl muttered as Anna passed, "Witch." A boy threw a rock at Michelle's feet and ran away. Anna bent down, picked up the stone, and clenched it in her hand. Not because it hurt, but because she realized they had grown too used to being targets. But that night, when Anna laid Michelle down to sleep, she no longer had the strength to offer comfort. A new fear had begun to grow inside her, the fear that soon they would not just be humiliated, but erased. And like a cruel prophecy, the turning point arrived. A thief was caught in another city, a man facing the gallows, who decided to save his life at any cost. Under interrogation, he began spilling Nama's supposed accomplices, secret hideouts. But the magistrate wasn't satisfied. They wanted something more monstrous, a tale that could ignite fear across all of Bavaria. Pressed beneath a red-hot iron boot, the thief screamed, "It's the Papenheimimer family. They kill children. They make candles from the fat of newborns." In that moment, one lie rewrote the fate of an entire family. No one asked, why would paupers kill hundreds of children without anyone noticing? No one questioned, does making invisible candles from baby fat even make sense? No, they only heard a nightmare that perfectly matched their existing fear, and that was enough. The news spread like wildfire. In the villages, people whispered, "They're demons in human skin. I told you. Just look at that woman's face. And the children surely witches too." Dell. That night, Anna heard a knock at the door. Not a polite knock, but the sound of boots slamming on rotting wood. The latch breaking as she ran to the front room. Soldiers burst, in armor glinting in torchlight. Swords drawn. Michelle screamed. Gumpre clung to Simon. Shaking, Paulus didn't even get a word out before he was struck down to the floor. Anna collapsed beside her husband, clutching his sleeve. But the soldiers tore her away, bound her tight. No one explained. No explanation was needed. Everything had already been decided the moment that thief opened his mouth. They were separated, locked away in pitch-black cells, in a room so small she couldn't stretch her legs. Anna could only listen to the scattered cries echoing from other cells, the cries of her own sons. But that was only the prelude to the tragedy. They were dragged out for interrogation. One by one, before them gleamed instruments of torture in the firelight. Red-hot tongs, iron boots, spiked chairs. Each time Paulus denied the charges, the tongs clamped harder on his hands, his feet. Each time Anna declared her innocence, the soldiers drove the iron nails deeper into her flesh. One day, they brought Paulus before Anna, tossed him to the floor like a sack of rags. "Look," a cold voice said. "He's confessed. Only you remain." "I'll wait." Anna looked at her husband, his face swollen, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling soundlessly. And in that moment, she understood that if she wanted to protect her children, there was no path left but surrender. And so, the confessions began to be recorded. Carefully, line by line. They said they had killed children, cast spells, met with the devil. Each line of ink was not truth but the aftermath of unbearable agony. And somewhere in that darkness, the three children still didn't understand that at this very moment, the last ticket out of hell had just been burned. That morning, the sky over Munich was blanketed with clouds as gray as ashes. And in the twisted alleys leading to the execution square, groups of townspeople had already begun to gather. They said there would be a grand execution, a cleansing ritual of the faith. Anna was yanked upright while the mist still hung in the air. Her hands were swollen, bruised purple, burn wounds leaking yellow fluid through filthy cloth. But as the soldiers bound her hands behind her back, the only thing she could think about was not the pain but the children. Where were they? Were they still alive? Had they eaten anything in the past few days? At the same time, Paulus lay on the cold stone floor of another cell. He no longer cried. When pain passes a certain threshold, the body loses even the strength to groan. Each time he opened his eyes, he saw only shadows and the sickly flicker of torchlight. When the soldiers came to drag him out, he did not resist. There was nothing left to hold on to. No reason to plead. The children were kept apart. Simone, the eldest, had gone nearly mute. Gumpre still clung to hope, asking the guards in a trembling voice, "Will we get to see our mother?" And Michelle only sat curled in a corner, her eyes wide open, as if she might never blink again. As the prisoners were led outside, the crowd parted. Some made the sign of the cross, others shouted curses, and some faces stayed silent. Eyes lowered, they couldn't bear to look directly at the tragedy unfolding. Because deep down, they knew. Today it's the Papenheimimers, but tomorrow it could be them. Paulus was laid onto a crude wooden cart. His legs no longer moved after countless nights crushed in iron shoes. Anna was bound and forced to walk behind. The two older boys trudged beside her. Michelle, too weak to walk, was carried in the arms of a soldier not out of compassion, but because they feared she would faint before the execution began. They called it the procession of repentance. But in truth, It was a stage where people were stripped of all dignity to become a public lesson in fear. Along the way, stops had been prepared in advance. At each station, the executioners paused for public punishment. I get it. The first stop, the executioner raised a pair of red-hot tongs. A moment of horrifying silence. Then came the searing sound of burning flesh, mingled with a stifled groan. Paulus trembled violently but made no sound. Anna turned her face away, but the soldiers grabbed her hair, forcing her to watch. They say watching someone you love being tortured is far worse than enduring it yourself. And when Anna saw her husband's hand convulse, his eyes clouded with pain, all that remained in her was a hollow emptiness, where even tears had long since dried up. Simon gripped Gumpre's hand tightly, as if letting go would make them both disappear. Michel buried his face into the guard's shoulder, sobbing in gasps. He was too young to understand exactly what was happening, only that it was all wrong, all horrifying. The procession continued. Second stop. Third each station. Another wound. Another message to the crowd. This is the fate of those accused of heresy. Lo, by the time they reached the square, Paulus was no longer conscious. They strapped him to the breaking wheel, a massive wooden frame designed to shatter bones, prolonging death as much as possible. Usually, a blow of mercy was granted, a final strike to the chest or neck to end the agony. But today, no mercy was offered. Anna was dragged to the stake. Dry wood and straw had already been laid at her feet. But before the fire was lit, the executioner had one last performance prepared, done so horrific that many would later say they couldn't recount it fully. He tore open the white shirt Anna had been forced to wear, a white symbol of false purity decreed by the court. He took a knife and slashed across her chest. Blood sprayed across the ground. A second later, he grabbed the chunks of flesh and shoved them into the mouths of her two restrained sons. Perhaps in that moment, Anna's soul died before the flames ever reached her. The crowd fell into absolute silence. Even the most eager among them couldn't speak. That scene had crossed the line of any justice. It was simply madness draped in religious robes. When the torch was lit, Anna didn't scream. The fire climbed her skirt, then wrapped around her body. But she kept her eyes fixed on her children. That look, they said, haunted people for years, leaving many sleepless. Simon was taken and beheaded immediately after. One swift sword strike, the only merciful death that day. Gumpre and Michel were deemed too young for the axe. They were sent to a Jesuit orphanage, where for 3 months, they heard the same phrase repeated daily. Your parents were demons. Lie, but even the pious sermons could not save their lives. One rainy morning, both were taken to the yard, hands bound. Michel was just 10. He cried, calling for his mother. No one answered. The rope tightened around his neck, and within minutes, he dangled lifeless like a torn rag doll. Gumpre was also executed, no exact date recorded. Perhaps, to the authorities, the death of 2 children was merely the final formality. Now, and so, the Papenheimimer family, once quietly poor, was turned into demons in the eyes of the people, then annihilated, down to the last bone. But think for a moment, if they had been born in another town, if they had been wealthier, if there hadn't been a thief willing to trade lies for his life, could they have lived an ordinary existence? Or was their sentence like the thousands burned during the witch hunts merely proof that when a community needs a devil, it will always find one? After the Papenheimimer family's death, Munich's square became infamous across Bavaria. People spoke of that execution as proof God had punished the witches. But others, when they remembered that morning, felt only a chill down their spine, because they knew there was no magic here, only cruelty dressed in moral robes. More than 400 names had been extracted from Paulus and Anna in their desperation. Neighbors who had once shared a piece of bread, the healer who treated their children, even beggars who had walked with them from village to village. That list quickly became a ticket for hundreds of other families into the machinery of torture. No lengthy trials needed. Each confession birthed new lists. Each fear, once fed, demanded more blood to be satisfied. Within just 2 years, dozens more executions followed. New pyres were built. More red-hot tongs forged. New shackle prepared. Each time smoke and fire rose. The crowds gathered again, half trembling, half thrilled, as if their silent crisis had found release in the screams and scent of burning flesh. Some families managed to flee in the dark of night, carrying a few bags of dry bread and their terrified children. Those children grew up with memories, parents called demons, siblings tortured, and everyone around them silentas, if it was all normal. Generations later, when the witch hunts had passed, people still whispered, "Those were the mad years." But no one dared ask deeper. Why was an entire community so ready to close its eyes to such horrors? History would later call the Papenheimimer case a lesson, but if you flip through those brittle old documents, you'll find it wasn't just a story of crime, it was the story of the terrifying normalcy of crime. A man wanting to save his own lifeline, a duke wanting to be praised turned that lie into policy. A crowd afraid cheered when children were hanged, and each citizen afraid of being named stayed silent. Think about it, what do those pieces form together? A machine of death that didn't need real devils because it ran perfectly on cowardice and human selfishness. Later, officials defended themselves. We were just following orders. Some townsfolk murmured, if we'd spoken up, our families would have died too. And so, over time, it all faded into something old. But to the children who watched their parents be executed, it never became old. They say a little girl, Paulus's granddaughter, grew up in a monastery orphanage. Every night, she dreamed of her grandmother kneeling at the stake, hair ablaze, eyes that never closed. In the dream, she would run to embrace her butt, her hands touched only ashes. That girl grew up quietly, never married, never had children. When asked why, she answered only once, "My blood is cursed." 1. You see, a false accusation doesn't just kill, it murders the belief in survivors that they are worthy of love. Century la terre. Historians unearthed the trial records. They discovered every confession had been extracted through torture. Not a single piece of real evidence had ever existed. Every accusation was simply a lie repeated until everyone believed it. You may ask, why didn't anyone stop it? Why didn't anyone speak up? But the bigger question is, in that moment, would your eye have dared to stand? That is the true power of collective fear. It turns good people into accomplices. It turns rumor into death sentences. Tonight, as you lie down and turn off the lights, I want you to remember this. The Papenheimimers were not demons. They were mothers, fathers, children who simply wanted to live like anyone else. They died not because of guilt but because a community needed a scapegoat. And once the flames rose, no one cared whether they were guilty or not. If you're still awake, ask yourself, have things like this truly disappeared? Or are they simply waiting different forms? Different names still return? If you think the story of the Papenheimimers was just an exception, a brief madness lost in time, then sadly, the truth is far crueler. Because Bavaria was not the only place, and certainly not the last. For 3 centuries across Europe, hundreds of thousands men, women, and children died in fire, under whips, or hung from gallows. All for one reason. Someone pointed a finger and called them witches. Imagine a small village, rooftops covered in moss, an old brick church standing silently beside the graveyard. Each afternoon, the toll of the bell stirs a vague fear. Whose door will the soldiers knock on tonight? Some trials began with nothing more than a stolen chicken. When no culprit was found, rumors spread, it must be a witch. Then an old blind beggar woman suddenly became the suspect. When they came to take her, She was still asleep. No evidence needed. No defense heard. Just a name added to the list. And once the interrogation began, that invisible grinding machine spun smoothly because pain, deep enough, can turn anyone into a confessor. Court records documented the details with chilling precision. The most fantastical confessions flying on broomsticks, copulating with demons, cursing, crops signed with trembling hands and streaks of fresh blood. In some regions, confessing wasn't to be spared, but to die more quickly, because if you insisted on your innocence, they'd torture you until you died. You see, the evil in these stories isn't some vague demon. It's something very mundane: fear, a village afraid of famine, an official afraid of losing power, a duke afraid of losing control. And to bury those fears, they chose to turn the weakest into targets. Later, when the wave of witch hunts had passed, many clergy and judges offered excuses. We didn't know. But the most painful question remains: when children were dragged to the stake, you didn't know either. One old document records a magistrate's words as he watched Anna Papenheimimer burn. I looked into her eyes, and I saw she knew her guilt. But no line mentioned the way Anna looked at her children. No record told of what she tried to whisper to Michelle before the flames swallowed her. History, in the end, always remembers the names of those in power more than those who died in silence. And then, when the smoke cleared and bones turned to ash, only half-true stories remained, passed down through generations. Some said the Papenheimimers truly were evil. Others said they were victims. But over time, no one could be sure. That's the final tragedy. The cruelty became so immense that it blurred the line between victim and monster in the memory of the world. You may think, today, we're more civilized. This could never happen again. But look closely, and you'll see the same pattern repeating, only with new names, new methods. Think of the communities ridiculed on social media, the lives ruined by accusations made before facts are known. Think of the times the crowd cheered as someone fell, then turned away when it was over, just to avoid being involved. No flames, no red-hot tongs, yet modern society is more than capable of destroying a person with complicit silence. Tonight, as you lie in the dark, ask yourself, if one day you were falsely accused, how many would dare defend you? And if one day the crowd needed a scapegoat, would you step forward to protect them or stand quietly in the background, pretending not to see? That's not an easy question. But only when we honestly confront it does the Papenheimimer story stop being a nightmare destined to repeat. If you're still awake, close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself standing in a stone-paved square, cold as ice. Before you is not Anna Papenheimimer, but a 12-year-old boy. His cheeks are sunken from hunger. His hands tremble, clutching a torn cap. His name was lost in the yellowed court records. The priests simply noted, a child. No parents by his side. No relatives spoke for him. He was arrested after a failed harvest. People said he wandered the fields, muttering spells. The truth might have been he was begging for food or praying for rain. But in those times, even a whispered prayer could become evidence of witchcraft. No one needed to ask him much. A child, a rumor, a field of dead corn, that was enough. The morning the boy was brought out, a fine misty rain fell. They didn't bother building a pyre. Hanging was cheaper and quicker. The adults gathered to watch, pulling their coats tight against the drizzle. But no one shielded the eyes of the crying child. A young clerk had been assigned to record the execution. He was new to the job, his hands still trembling as he held the pen. In the record, he wrote only one sentence about the boy. He begged for mercy repeatedly, said he would never call the rain again. That year, the number of people hanged or burned in Bavaria exceeded 200. Each execution brought a new wave of accusations. And then, like every fever of fanaticism, it quieted once the community had grown too exhausted. But do you see? It is the silence of those around that provides the soil for tragedy to grow. A 19th century historian once sifted through the records of the Papenheimimer case and other witch trials. He concluded with one chilling sentence. This crime needed no real devils. It only needed fear and a community that lacked the courage to resist. In doubt, ask yourself, if one day your name was added to such a list, would anyone speak a word in your defense? More than 300 years later, in a small town, an unmarked cemetery was discovered. A few graves bore strange symbols, a cross struck through, marking those condemned of heresy. No one knew who lay beneath the cold soil. It could have been a mother, a child, or an old man who only wanted to live in peace. History did not preserve their voices. It only kept the dry records' names. Exécution date. Fabricated crimes. But if you are brave enough to read to the end, you will realize this. They were not legends. They were ordinary people. Poor, hungry, and painfully vulnerable. And precisely because of that, they were chosen as sacrifices. Their deaths are a dark mirror reflecting collective cowardice and the hunger for power dressed in the robes of morality. Do you still believe such things couldn't happen again? All it takes is a fearful community, a leader shrewd enough to exploit that fear, and a crowd too tired to seek the truth, and everything begins anew. Perhaps not with pyres, but with more subtle tools. Remember, on the day Anna Papenheimimer was burned, no one saw a witch. They only saw their own anxieties, then gave them the easiest name to swallow. Demon. If you shudder a little tonight, that's only human, because this story isn't just about the past. It's a reminder that justice, without compassion, becomes a collective nightmare. Try to imagine a winter night like the night Anna was arrested. You sit in a dim room, fire crackling, wind howling outside, and then there's a knock at the door. You know you're innocent, but as the boots pound the threshold, as a cold voice reads your name, can you truly believe the conscience of your community will save you? You see, the Papenheimimer tragedy didn't begin with heresy. It began with a liand, the compromise of everyone who stood nearby. Perhaps the most terrifying thing isn't the torturers. It's the eyes that watched from behind shutters, silently observing the flames, rise then turning away, as if it had nothing to do with them. Tonight, as you lay down, I don't wish you sleeplessness. But if you are to lie awake, let this question rest in your heart. If I had been born into a family like their spoor, shunned, could I have escaped that fate? And perhaps the answer, however painful, is no. If you still have the patience to listen, I'll take you to another land. Another time where the story is almost the same. Only the names of the condemned and the reasons invented to kill them have changed. We leave Bavaria, crossing mountains and forests of Europe, arriving at a small town in Alsace, near today's French-German border. There, at the end of the 16th century, people firmly believed that summer storms, those that ripped off rooftops and flooded wheat fields, were the work of wind witches. Nay, the name might sound strange to you, but to the people of that time, wind witches were the most dangerous, because they didn't need elaborate spells. Just a few murmured words at a fence was enough to summon a storm. Each year, when the harvest failed, a new hunt began. And always, the list of suspects started with the poorest. There was an old woman named Margaretha, widow, no children, surviving by working for farm owners. When the storms came, her own roof was torn off. Her only possession, a rotting wooden chest. But she often begged along the roads, so everyone remembered her face. One morning, she was dragged into the town square, hands bound behind her back. A young priest held a book and read the accusation. You have stood in the fields many times, chanting spells to ruin the crops. Dad, Marguerite tried to defend herself. I only prayed to God for the rain to stop, but in the eyes of the crowd, she was already a demon in human form. After 3 nights of imprisonment and torture, She confessed. She said she had sold her soul to the devil in exchange for a sack of flour and 3 coins. They burned her on a wooden pyre right beside the church. They believed it was cleansing the community. Oh, but what was cleansed? Only the breath of the weakest among them. Then the delusion that they had done something noble. Do you see the pattern? In Bavaria, the Papenheimimer family was accused because they were poor. Unclean, in Alsace. Margaret was killed because she was alone. Unprotected, in hundreds of witch hunts. The fabricated reasons changed, but the victims remained the same. The smallest, voiceless, most defenseless people. Some court records contain confessions dozens of pages long, filled with grotesque details, eating children, flying over rooftops, convening with the devil. But if you turn to the last page, the signatures always tremble, written by hands crushed or burned. Many modern scholars read those records, then close the files and sigh. This isn't a history of witchcraft. It's a history of power hunger. So why do these stories still haunt us centuries later? Perhaps because they never truly disappeared. They only changed their disguise. Today, we have social media. We have call-out campaigns. Hashtags that spread faster than fire. People are quick to believe an anonymous accusation, share it thousands of times, then turn away when real consequences come. We tell ourselves we're not like the Middle Ages. But really, it only takes a fearful community and a chilling enough story for us to find someone to burn without ever needing a real flame. Imagine, if Anna Papenheimer lived today, would the story be any different? Perhaps, instead of red-hot tongs, she'd be named and shamed across every news site. Every photo of her family would be cropped, commented on, mocked. The children would be given cruel nicknames, and when they finally collapsed, someone would breathe a quiet sigh of relief. At least it's not me. Hi, you see? The fire didn't disappear. It just changed form, continuing to burn the weakest. If tonight, hearing this story makes you uneasy, it's not because you're weak. It's because deep down, you realize anyone could become the Papenheimimer. All it takes is a rumor and a crowd ready to believe it. And that truth is the greatest nightmare of all. If you're still awake, let me take you further beyond the Black Forest of Germany, across frozen meadows, to Scotland, land of mist and grey stone castles mirrored in the still lakes. There, in the 17th century, another infamous witch trial took place. It is remembered by a name both ordinary and chilling, the North Berwick witch hunt. It all began when a violent storm struck King James VI fleet. Winds capsized ships. Waves swallowed sailors. The king survived, but fear clung to him like an incurable sickness. A few sycophants whispered in his ear, "Your Majesty, that was no natural storm. Witches summoned it to assassinate you." Udge. You see? Every witch hunt begins with fear and a convenient explanation. That very night, soldiers swept through coastal villages. The first they arrested was Agnes Samsona, an old midwife who made her living delivering babies and mixing herbal remedies. To the poor, she was a healer. To the powerful, she was a threat for. She understood the human body more deeply than any priest. They threw her in a dark cell, stripped her naked to inspect for the devil's mark. When they found a mole behind her shoulder, something any human could have, they declared it undeniable proof. 14 days later, under torture, Agnes confessed to all kinds of wild crimes, meeting with Satan, crafting wooden dolls to curse the king, boiling infant bones into poison. Ask yourself, how could an old woman, living in a thatched hut, possibly command the power to destroy a royal fleet? But in the grip of mass panic, no one asked questions. Her confession quickly led to dozens more. Each new prisoner named a few others, neighbors, co-workers, even family. Each name added another reason to tighten chains and stack higher pyres. Within 2 years, over 70 people were accused. Agnes was burned alive at the stake, never getting to see the face of anyone brave enough to believe she was innocent. They say, the night before she was led to execution, she muttered just one sentence. God will know I did not lie. But in North Berwick, as in Bavaria, as in Alsace, no one listened to that voice. You see, the flames ignited by fear don't just consume bodies, they scorch the conscience of the community. When the witch hunt faded, the king still lived. The harvests still failed from drought or storms. The people were still hungry. But at least, they could reassure themselves, we rid ourselves of evil. Those who were killed became numbers. They no longer had names. They no longer had stories, and thus the community was cleansed not of heresy, but of collective guilt. Many years later, a young scholar discovered the records of the North Berwick trial. He copied the entire confession of Agnes Sampson. When he reached the final page, he froze at a single trembling line written in her own hand. I swear, I only said what they wanted to hear. That sentence has clung to history for 400 years like a thorn. Think about it if the storm hadn't struck King James's fleet. If a courtier hadn't suggested interrogation. If just one person had stood up and said, this is absurd. Would Agnes have survived? Just as if a thief in Bavaria hadn't invented the story of invisible candles. If a duke hadn't needed a show trial. If the crowd hadn't gathered shoulder to shoulder to watch Anna Papenheimer's execution. Perhaps that family would have seen a few more winters. Just a few little ifs, but no one dared speak them while it still mattered. You might tell yourself we live in a more civilized age. That we would never burn the innocent. But think of today's online public trials. The photos circulated, the accusations shared before they're verified, and the silence of thousands of watching eyes. In the past, they called it witchcraft. Today, we use other labels: predator, liar, traiteur. But the machinery is the same: a frightened crowd, a convenient story, and a powerless person who cannot defend themselves. If tonight you find it hard to sleep, it's not because this story is distant. It's because it's close. It lies quietly in the instincts of every community waiting for the chance to rise again. The flames that once consumed Agnes and Anna never fully died out. They sleep in the ashes of history, ready to burn again whenever we forget. Justice cannot exist without compassion. And if you're wondering why I tell these painful stories night after night, the answer is simple. Because every time we stop saying the names like Anna, like Agnesville wins again easily, quietly, without needing any justification. If you're still willing to listen, let me take you a little farther to Transylvania. Mention that name, and most will think of vampire legends, cold stone castles, and mist-covered forests. But few know that throughout the 17th century, Transylvania was also the stage for decades of witch trials. Unlike Bavaria or Scotland, here the nightmare came from both sides. The Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, each wanted to prove itself purer, more holy. And the easiest way was to accuse a neighbor of selling their soul to the devil. There was a village called Sigisoarajust. A few hundred people crowded together on a rocky hill. One harsh winter, a plague swept through, leaving dozens of children dead within a week. People were terrified, knocking on church doors to pray. But prayer didn't stop the dying. And as hope faded, a familiar thought took root. Someone must have summoned the sickness. As with every old pattern, they began to look around for the weakest face. Their gaze settled on a woman named Ilona, a widow with no close relatives. She made a living by sowing and gathering herbs in the mountains. She was often called to help deliver babies, to mix medicine for children. Those who once thanked her now whispered, she poisoned them. She always muttered strange words. She never kneeled in church. Within 3 days, Ilona was arrested. They locked her in a stone basement with no light, no fire. On the first night, The guards heard her singing softly, not a spell, but a lullaby. Perhaps she was remembering the child she had lost years ago. By morning, when the door opened, she sang no more. They interrogated her with the now familiar tools: iron boots, heated tongs, wooden mullets. The same questions repeated over and over. Who are your accomplices? Who taught you magic? In the surviving records, Ilona's trembling handwriting contains only one line. I don't know. I don't know. But when pain exceeds human endurance, truth becomes a luxury. She began to confess own crime at a time, from small to grand, that she sprinkled bone powder into cradles, that she whispered to the wind to spread illness, that she met the devil on the mountainside. Those confessions became the past that allowed the trial to expand. Every name she uttered, sometimes just to buy a few minutes of relief from torture, became a death sentence for someone else. 31 people were arrested afterward. Among them, a girl just 14 years old, who had once come to Ilona's house to learn sewing. The girl was also imprisoned, also tortured, also gave names in the hope of surviving. You see it, don't you? It's always the same closed loop. One accusation, a wave of fear, and a new list of names. And so, the machine keeps turning, until there are enough corpses for everyone to believe that justice has been served. They burned Ilona on a day in March. Just as the snow had melted, the crowd gathered tightly. Some whispered prayers. Others were merely curious. Among them was the 14-year-old girl, her young pupil, also bound, forced to watch. They wanted her to repent. No one knows what the girl thought as she watched the flames consume the hands that once taught her to hold a needle. But after the execution, she fell strangely silent. Months later, when another trial opened, she was taken again, and this time, there was no one left alive to testify. Does this story sound different from Bavaria, Alsace, Scotland? Or do you see that it's just another variation of the same collective sickness, the need to pin fear on the weakest? If you ever thought evil looked like a horned creature with claws, remember the faces in the crowd. Ordinary neighbors, bakers, young mothers, tavern keepers. None of them called themselves cruel. They just kept repeating the most dangerous sentence ever spoken. We had no other choice. Jean. And when the burning was done, they all went home, ate dinner, rocked their children to sleep, and told themselves, at least this time, our family is safe. Jean. But what kind of safety is that? Safety built on others' bones is no more solid than a house built on sand. New rumor, and it collapses. Anyone can be next. If you still wish to listen, let me tell you another story, this time not in Europe, but in New England, on American soil. In 1692, in Salema, small village where everyone prided themselves on their payacha, a storm of fear broke out and did not stop until 20 people were dead, Wooners imprisoned, and the honor of the entire community turned to ash. It all started with a few young girls. They began to have seizures, scream, and speak nonsense. Their parents panicked. A minister was called, and then came a single explanation. Witches have bewitched the children. Do you see the familiar pattern? An unexplained event, a panicked crowd, and the need to find someone to blame. The girls, only 10 or 11 years old, were asked, "Who hurt you?" At first, they said nothing, but under pressure from parents, clergy, and neighbors, they began to point fingers. The first name was a black slave woman named Tituba. Then Sarah Good, a poor woman who begged for food. Then Sarah Osborne, a widow with no one to defend her. They were dragged from their homes in the night, hands bound, marched to the church. People gathered to watch, whispering, "At last, we've found the devil." Tituba, under torture and threat, confessed to everything. She said she had met the devil, signed his book, used wooden dolls to curse the children, But instead of ending the hysteria, her confession fed the fire. Because when asked, "Who were your accomplices?" Tituba began to name her neighbors. Each name written down with firm strokes of the pen, each stroke a full stop. In just a few weeks, the list of suspects grew to over 30, then 60, then 100. Makeshift prisons were built. Entire families locked away. A 3-year-old child was shackled because her mother had been accused of witchcraft. Imagine that scene, a cold night. A shivering child, not understanding why she was chained next to her mother in a room thick with fear. When the trials began, justice was not present in that room. Only the need to declare, "We are the good ones. We are purifying our community." Lo, the evidence presented sounded like something out of a fairy tale. A cloth doll stuck with pins, a mole on a shoulder, a dream someone recounted. Yet these small things were enough to kill. Sarah Good, the wretched woman who had only ever begged for porridge, was led to the gallows in the summer. As the noose tightened around her neck, she still maintained her innocence. Her daughter, only 4 years old, sat under a tree, clutching a torn doll, watching her mother die without crying. Perhaps she had already cried too much. By then, there were no tears left. When winter came, the madness began to subside, because at last, people began to fear themselves, because everyone knew, if this continued, no one would be left alive to look each other in the eye. The following year, authorities tried to erase the shame. They declared the investigations inaccurate, offered a few coins in compensation to the families of the dead. But no one truly believed that silver could patch the hole in a community that had just murdered its own neighbors with its own hands. Do you see it? Salem, Bavaria, Scotland, Transylvania, all just variations of the same story. A frightened community, a poisoneux rumeur, a crowd eager to witness suffering, and the innocent with no chance to defend themselves. If there is one shared truth, it's this: there were never any true monsters, only ordinary people who chose to look away and let it happen. Tonight, when you lie down, I don't wish insomnia upon you, but I do hope you'll remember, we've never truly escaped those flames. We've only changed the justification. In the past, they said for God. Thus, today, we say for justice, for safety, for the community. Thus, but if the outcome is still the crushing of the weakest, then does the difference really exist? If you're still awake, still willing to listen, let me take you out of the Middle Ages, out of the 17th century, into what was supposed to be a more enlightened Aretha 20th century. You'd think things had changed, that humanity had learned from the fires that consumed the innocent. Sadly, the answer is no. We no longer build pyres in town squares, but we've invented other ways more sophisticated. Colder tow, destroy lives without striking a single match. In 1950s America, fear no longer bore the name witch. It wore a new mask: communism. In those days, all it took was a vague accusation: he's a communist, and your life was over. Jobs disappeared, friends turned away, families shattered, and the most terrifying part, no proof was needed. A blacklist was drawn up. They called it the blacklist, a list of those barred from working in film, media, education. Award-winning directors and screenwriters were now hiding, afraid to walk the streets. They were turned into devils by a single newspaper headline. Imagine this: one night, you're sitting in your small living room, and the radio announces your name. Outside the window, neighbors stare in and whisper. The next morning, your nameplate is removed at work. Your child is pushed down at school because her dad is a traitor. As if you aren't burned, but everything that once made up your life has turned to ash. There was a man named Dalton Trumbo, a famous screenwriter, who once said, "When the fear is great enough, you don't need fire. A list and a cowardly crowd are enough." As it, and in truth, He knew that better than anyone, because he himself was placed on the blacklist, lost everything, and had to write under false names for 13 years to support his family. When asked who he hated most, he simply replied, "I don't hate the accuser. I only fear the crowd that believed the accusation and stayed silent." Doubt. You see, no matter the century, the mechanism remains exactly the same. An accusation, a crowd that needs someone to blame, a community silently watching the innocent get crushed. Perhaps you think, but things are different now. We have laws, independent media. But ask yourself honestly, if tomorrow a post appears accusing someone of being terrible, would you pause to ask, is it true? Or would you share? Comment. Join in because it makes you feel safer? In the past, they reassured one another, we must destroy the witches to protect the village. In the last century, they said, we must punish the communists to save the nation. Today, we say, we must expose evil to make society better. All of it sounds righteous. But if behind those slogans are people who lose their dignity, their future, then what's the difference? A scholar once wrote, no community is truly civilized if it always needs someone to hate. Do you agree? If you're unsure, remember Anna Papenheimimer. Remember Agnes Sampson. Remember those who died not because of their sins but because the people needed a scapegoat. Tonight, as you close your eyes, I hope you'll ask yourself, if one day I'm the one being accused, how many will dare say they don't believe it? It's an old question, but every era must answer it anew. And often, the answer is not as beautiful as we'd like to believe. You've listened to this story with me for many minutes, perhaps hours, and I believe that if you're still here, it means you're not someone who easily looks away from painful truths. From Bavaria to Scotland, from Transylvania to Salem, and even into the 20th century with its infamous blacklists, we've seen the same script repeated. A frightened community. An accusation may be born of envy, resentment, or just a story spun for entertainment. Then a nodding crowd. Then people dragged onto public platforms, so others could revel in their shame and death. Afterward, when the fire dies down, the rope is untied, or that sensational headline is no longer read, everyone returns home. They tell themselves, at least it didn't happen to me. Lie. But in truth, it happened to all of them. Because every time a community chooses silence, they've agreed to sacrifice a part of their own humanity. Some might say, but if I speak up, I'll be in trouble. Lie. Yes. True courage is never free. It always demands a cost. Sometimes your safety. Sometimes your honor. Sometimes even your life. We've grown used to the idea, I'm just an ordinary person. I can't change anything. No, but if every ordinary person believes that, then the monsters dressed as justice will always have a place to thrive. Here is the English translation of your powerful closing monologue. Exactly as requested, with no additions. There's a quote I deeply love, though I don't know who said it first. Each time we stay silent in the face of evil, a part of our soul dies before our body ever leaves this world. Can you feel that? Tonight, as the story ends, I don't wish for you to leave here afraid. I only hope you leave with clarity, the most precious gift history can give us. The clarity to recognize the greatest evils don't happen because demons walk into our village. They happen because good people choose to bow their heads. The clarity to ask yourself, if one day someone accuses someone I love, what will I do? If one day the crowd chants to burn someone on a pile of dry wood, will I have the courage to say no? You know, among thousands of old court records, the most haunting thing isn't the verdicts. It's the trembling confessions, written by hands torn apart from torture, still trying to scrawl one final line. I am innocent. That sentence is simple. Desperate proof that even when bones are broken and flesh is burned black, The human soul still longs to be seen as worthy of forgiveness, of being heard. You might think that's weakness, but I believe it's the most beautiful part of us. If you're still awake, I want to thank you. Thank you for spending your time, for patiently listening to stories many would rather forget. Thank you for staying, even when the pain in each sentence grew too heavy. And thank you, because by sitting here with Mevan through mere wordsit means at least one person is willing to keep the memory of those forgotten souls alive. Perhaps tonight you'll struggle to sleep. Perhaps you'll lie in the dark, thinking of Anna Papenheimimer, of Agnes Sampson, saying of the children hanged just because of a rumor. But then tomorrow morning, the sun will rise, and you'll still have the chance to do differently, to not bow your head, to not stay silent, to not become part of the quiet crowd. Before we part, I want to remind you of something I believe we all need to hear, especially in the long nights. You matter. Whether you are rich or poor, strong or fragile, famous or unknown, you still deserve to be heard, to be respected, to live without being blamed for sins you never committed. If one day you find yourself alone, remember, many people had to die just so this world could learn a simple truth, that no one should be burned just because of someone else's fear. So tonight, before you close your eyes, I hope you'll promise yourself this: no matter what happens tomorrow, I will not become a silent accomplice. It's not a grand vow, just a small step to keep the flame of humanity from going out. Wishing you a peaceful sleep, the sleep of those who know that darkness will always exist, but still choose to hold a small candle in their hand. See you again in the next night's story. Good night.